Buying your first home is a huge accomplishment, and it's also an extremely exciting time in your life. However, it is a huge decision and one that should not be taken lightly. There's a ton of thought that needs to go in this, and you need to do it properly, or else you may end up with huge regrets after purchasing your home. So today, I'm going to talk about the 5 biggest regrets that I see first-time homebuyers make, and these are the regrets they have after they move into the property. And don't get me wrong, it's easy throughout the excitement of this process to get caught up in the heat of the moment and overlook certain things. However, in this video, we're going to talk about what these regrets are, the most common ones that I see anyway, and we're going to talk about how to avoid them. But just before I get into it, if you're new here, my name is Andrew Stevens, and I've been a realtor in Halifax for 9.5 years, and I'm a co-owner of a brokerage here in the HRM. And if you want to be educated on the Halifax real estate market, then you're in the right place. So hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to book a call or meet with me to chat about real estate, if you're thinking about making a move in Halifax, you can do so anytime in the Calendar link below my description at a time when it's convenient for you. Okay, so let's get right into it. And this list is in no particular order. And to be truthful, if you ask 10 different realtors, you might get 10 different responses on this. But these are the top 5 regrets that I see, at least in my experience as a realtor over the last 9.5 years. So let's dive right into it. And number 1 is underestimating the costs involved. So there's a ton of costs involved in owning a home, and they add up very, very quickly. So it's important to budget as much as humanly possible before purchasing your first home. And there's so many things to consider, and I think a lot of people just look at the mortgage payment, but it's the mortgage payment, it's the property taxes, it's the insurance, it's the maintenance, it's the utilities. All of this adds up very, very quickly, and there's nothing worse than being house poor, especially if you're a young professional that just purchased your first home. You don't want to get a text from a buddy on a Friday night at 7 o'clock saying, hey, we're running down to Dirty Nelly's for a beer, can you come meet us? You don't want to have to say, oh, no, I can't because I literally have no money because I'm house broke, because I spent all my money on my property tax bill or my utilities because I didn't budget properly and I didn't take it into account. So how to avoid it? Well, the big thing is budget, budget, budget. I can't say this enough. And there's so many things to look at before pulling the trigger on your first property. But one thing I would definitely suggest. So first of all, in terms of the utilities and things like this, we can usually get these costs up front before you firm up the deal on your property, either before you write the offer or during the due diligence process. And then the other thing I would consider is a lot of people go to get pre-approved, and the mortgage broker tells them, yeah, you're good up to, let's say, $500,000. Okay, but a lot of people stop there. And so they just say, I'm approved for $500,000 and I'm going to buy something for $500,000. But what you should be doing is you should be asking that mortgage broker or that mortgage specialist to work out the numbers for you in terms of what your monthly payments are going to be at these different price points. So if you're looking up to, say, $500,000, let's say most of the homes you're going to be looking at are between the 400 and maybe 475 range. You want to know, what's your payment at 450? What's your payment at 400? What's your payment at 500? And your mortgage broker, if you're working with a good one, will be able to provide this for you so that you know exactly what to expect depending on what the purchase price is going to be. And don't forget, just because you're pre-approved to $500,000 doesn't mean you have to spend $500,000. I would say it is very rare that a first-time homebuyer should be purchasing right at the tip of their max budget unless they're just squeezing in to a specific price point and they need to do so. All right, moving on to number 2, and this one is compromising on location. So I'm sure you've heard this line before: location, location, location. And it couldn't be further from the truth. And I believe as a young professional, this is more important than pretty much any other time in your life, except when you're looking to go toward that forever home with your growing family. So a lot of young buyers, especially, I find that they decide to go for the nicer home with the better finishes, but in a way worse location for them, meaning a longer commute, meaning a longer trip into downtown, meaning, further away from family and all sorts of things like this. And this can lead to a huge regret after purchasing your home. I can't stress enough that the location is something that is really going to matter to you, and it's really going to make a big difference in how enjoyable your everyday life is. So you need to consider things like your proximity to your work, amenities, family. If you have kids, how close are their schools, how close are their friends? All of these certain things play into account. So I'm not saying that just because you're a young professional means you have to live downtown. It really depends on you, your lifestyle, and what you want. I'm not saying that everybody wants to live downtown, but I'm saying that if you work downtown and you go downtown every Friday and Saturday night, you probably don't want to be an hour commute into the city every day if you can avoid it. Now, obviously, this is budget driven to a certain extent because your budget's going to determine where you can look for homes. But at the end of the day, you really need to choose a location that is best for you rather than the HGTV house that is going to have the better finishes. But overall, those are not going to make you as happy as the location at the end of the day. One big thing I find with first time home buyers is they often underestimate their daily commute. And I'll say this, it's one thing to drive out to a home that's a half an hour or 45 minutes out of town on a Saturday morning in the summertime when you're looking at a house viewing or if you're going to go there for a property inspection. But you need to consider making this commute into work and back every single day, every day of the year, rain or shine, in the dead of winter when it's a snowstorm. These things matter, and it's important to think about this before pulling the trigger. So to avoid, you need to really consider what your lifestyle looks like, what your daily commute looks like, what's important to you. Do you want to be close to family? Do you always go down to the South Shore every weekend? Well, if so, you probably don't want to live way on the North Shore outside of downtown Halifax because that's going to add another half an hour to your commute every single weekend that you make this trip to visit family or whatever that might be. So you need to write all this stuff down. You need to talk to an experienced buyer's agent and they can help you through this process to determine what's the best location for you based on your budget and based on your lifestyle. All right, now moving on to number 3, and this one is buying too much house, or on the flip side, not buying enough house. I think a lot of times buyers get stuck on the idea of buying the biggest and best house they can get for their money. But what they should be doing is they should be thinking about what house is the best for them, their lifestyle, and their needs. And that doesn't always mean the biggest house. Bigger homes come with bigger problems. You need to furnish them, you need to heat them, you need to maintain them, and that all comes at a cost. So if you don't need the space, you don't want all kinds of extra space that you're not going to use. Now, on the flip side of this, buying too small is another huge problem that I see. It's one thing to be able to squeeze into a home today, but your first home should be looked at as a 3, 4, or likely a 5-year plan. So if you're a young professional couple that just got married and kids are on the horizon in the next year or so, well, if you're planning to do this, you might not want to buy a 1-bedroom condo, for example. So you need to think about your future needs and you need to consider what you need today, but also what are you likely to need in 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years down the road. Because as a first-time home buyer, let's say you're mid-20s to mid-30s, give or take, as a general statement, a lot can change in a 5-year period in this time in your life. So to avoid, you need to very strongly consider your current lifestyle and what your lifestyle is going to look like in 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. And again, if you're a young professional couple, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to buy the biggest house you can within your budget, right at the tip of your budget especially. You need to think of it from the point of view of, I need to buy the best house within my budget that works for me and my lifestyle and will continue to work for me and my lifestyle for the next 3, 4, or 5 years. So again, if you're a newly married couple and you're planning on having a kid next year, that 1-bedroom condo may work for you today, but it's not the right fit for your first property based on your plans in the next 5 years. So one of the questions I ask every buyer as soon as we start working together, I ask them, where do they see themselves in 5 years and how long do they plan to live at the current property that we're looking at purchasing? Because based on the answers to those questions, it really will put them in the right direction of what they should be looking for today. All right, moving on to number 4, and this one is skipping property inspections. So there's not very many cases that I would suggest that especially a first-time home buyer skips a home inspection. Maybe you have super deep pockets. Maybe you're going to gut the home anyway. Maybe you're a contractor and you know what you're getting yourself into, or maybe you have some family money on the back end that's going to help you do some renovations and you're not worried about it. And at the end of the day, I would say this is not happening nearly as much now as it was during the market that we saw during the pandemic. When the market was really hot, a lot of people were forgoing home inspections, and I can guarantee you there are a ton of people out there in Halifax that very much regret this today. And I'm not just talking about home inspections, I'm talking about well, septic, or maybe sewer line if it's on city services, maybe a radon test. It really depends on what you're buying and where it is and what type of property that you're looking at. And I'm not saying you need to complete property inspections so that you can renegotiate the price or anything like that. This is not necessarily a negotiating tactic, although sometimes this does happen. It's more so to educate yourself and to learn about what you're buying so you can make a strong and sound decision and you can be confident before you firm up the deal after the conditions are met. Now, a good experienced agent can walk you through this and talk about what kind of inspections you need to do. So, to avoid, talk to your realtor about what property inspections you should be doing, who they recommend, and why. And then you need to look at all these reports and take everything into account before firming up that deal and making it an official sold property. And this can save major regret down the road. And I'll give you a really quick example. So, I once had a listing that they were first time home buyers and they bought a home privately. And then 5 years later, they went to sell it and they listed it with me at that time. So when we got an accepted offer, that new buyer did a sewer line scope, which was not completed by the homeowners when they purchased the property 5 years ago. And when they did the sewer line scope, it was a disaster and it needed to be dug up and replaced. Now, unfortunately, sometimes these can be lined, which is a lot cheaper and a lot less destructive to the property. But of course, in this situation, the pipe was basically crushed and it needed to be dug up. Unfortunately, this sewer line specifically went underneath the front steps of the house, down the front yard, under two pretty new retaining walls before it got to the street connection. And this entire thing had to be dug up. It cost almost $35,000. And the worst part is, generally speaking, this is going to end up falling onto the seller one way or the other, whether they fix it or whether it's a price adjustment or whatever that might be. But based on the condition of this particular sewer line, I would strongly suggest that 5 years ago when they bought the property, it was already a mess. And if they did their sewer lateral inspection then, they would have avoided this headache for them during this particular deal when they go to turn around and sell the property 5 years later. Now, in this particular case, this property was in an area that grew a ton. They had a load of equity in there, and it wasn't a deal killer. But again, it was a $30,000 hit, and it was a really tough situation, a very stressful situation to work through. But by doing an inspection up front when they purchased the property, that could have solved a lot of headache 5 years down the road. So yes, I know it's a hot market, especially in that first-time home buyer kind of price point under $500,000. But generally speaking, nowadays, it's not going to kill the deal if you have an inspection clause in there. And I would strongly suggest in 99.9% of cases that you do every inspection possible on whatever you're buying. And let's face it, you're spending a ton of money and you should be very confident in what you're purchasing. And last but not least, this leads me right into number 5 perfectly. And this one is overlooking property flaws. So, yes, there are a ton of things that you're going to have to consider when you're buying your first property. And if you're buying a home under $500,000 in the HRM, generally speaking, there's going to be some things that you're going to want to fix up. But those fixer uppers can spiral out of control very, very quickly if you're not careful. I think as a buyer, especially a first time buyer, we have the tendency to lean in the direction of thinking about all the big ticket items. So the roof, the windows, the foundation, maybe the heating system, some things like this. And if all these are good, we overlook a lot of little items. And I see it all the time. And buyers are like, oh, yeah, that's no big deal. That's no big deal. That's no big deal. I'm not worried about that. But these smaller repairs, $300 here, $500 there, $1,000 there, this adds up so quickly. And it's so easy to get down the rabbit hole and not really realize you're getting there. And all of a sudden, you're 5 grand deep into something that you really didn't account for in your budget. As an example, I once did a reno and I left out two main costs on my spreadsheet by accident. And this was a gut job reno I did on an investment property that I owned a few years back. And it was just an oversight in my budget. And one of them was light bulbs, and the other one was door handles. So, door handles, especially if you're looking at those black ones, those modern, nice ones, they're like $40 a pop. Well, that ended up being 3, 4, or $500 for the whole house. And then on top of that, the light bulbs alone, because all these new modern lights have these Edison light bulbs and they're like $10 each. The light bulbs alone were like 4 or $500 after my renovation was done. So I've left these things off my spreadsheet. I completely forgot to put them in there. And it literally was $1,000 for like doorknobs and light bulbs. So that's just one example. It's a stupid one, but it gets the point across that some of these little things that you're like, oh, that's no big deal. That's no big deal. That's no big deal. Well, pretty much everything these days is going to cost you $100 or a couple $100. So it adds up very, very quickly. So to avoid, thoroughly review every inspection report in detail with your buyer's agent, and they should be able to help you walk through those costs as well. And if need be, get somebody in to quote some of these fixes you're planning on doing. Again, it's all well and good to say you're going to fix up the property, but you just want to make sure you know what you're getting into so you don't get down the rabbit hole and know that you're out of budget and spending way too much money, because it can spiral out of control very, very quickly. So there you have it. There's my top 5. And if you notice, there is one common theme, and this is that you need to put a ton of time and effort into these decisions so that you don't spend literally the most money you've ever spent in your life only to get down the road feeling a ton of regret in what you did. And if you're working with an experienced buyer's agent, they can help you with these discussions, and they can help push you in the right direction so that you can make a strong, sound, confident decision when you purchase your first home that you won't regret years down the road. Now, if you're still here watching and you got any value out of this video, all I ask is that you hit that like button and you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my future content, and that'll help push this out to more people like you who may be interested in seeing videos about the Halifax real estate market. And until next time, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support, and have a great day.